This is Mr. Walter Quinn, 72, the quiet man at the end of the table who smells faintly of machine oil and peppermint tea. To his children and grandchildren, he is the collector of useless things, screws in coffee tins, wires in tangled nests, a museum of broken radios and dented fans. They roll their eyes when he shuffles past with a biscuit tin full of bolts. They call it junk. They call him absent-minded. They call him too old to matter. That afternoon, as sunlight slants through the thin curtains of his small living room, a cheap plastic thermometer ticks on the coffee table while Walter, with hands that shake but aim true, adjusts a seal on a clay canister lined with sand he washed and sifted himself. The grandkids giggle from the hallway. Grandpa is fixing trash again, and his son sighs, "Dad, please stop, you will only make a mess." He says nothing. He notes numbers in a pocketbook with corners worn soft by years. Outside, a motorbike coughs down the lane. Inside, a spoon clinks against a chipped mug. It is not the laughter that hurts him most. It is the speed of it, how quickly the joke arrives, how quickly it leaves him behind. On the shelf is a faded photo of a young machinist in a factory apron. Steel filings on his cheeks like glitter, a boy who once solved other men's problems before lunch. Now he screws the lid again, breathes, waits, checks the thermometer and hears the whisper. He is a hoarder. He is a sweet old fool. But that is not the worst part. The worst part is that none of them ask what he is making, a small answer to a big fear. A way to keep something precious safe when the power fails and the night runs to hot. And what happens next will make a room full of doubters go quiet as stone. Tell me, if the people you love said your time had passed, would you bow your head or prove them wrong? Walter's house stood at the far end of a narrow street, half hidden behind lilac bushes that bloomed wildly every spring. The paint on the walls had peeled into soft curls, the roof tiles sagged. Yet inside, his world was carefully ordered. Glass jars lined the shelves filled with nails, coils, tiny screws polished like coins. His workshop was no more than the old shed behind the kitchen, lit by a single bulb that hummed and flickered when the power dipped. Every morning, Walter shuffled out there with his cane, setting down a thermos of tea and working until the air smelled of iron dust. To the neighbors, he was the eccentric old man who still tinkered with relics from the last century. To his family, he was simply wasting time. They often left him to his shed while they gathered in the main house for loud dinners and birthday cakes. On Sundays, when his children and grandchildren visited, the shed became a running joke. Grandpa's laboratory, they said, smirking as if the rusty hinges and the faint chemical scent were part of a play. Walter never corrected them. He only smiled, his eyes hidden behind glasses with scratches deep as scars. Beyond the shed, the world had moved on fast. Technology conferences filled the city with banners of glowing screens and promises of the future. Startups run by young men and women raised millions in a week. In that world, Walter had no place. His pension barely covered the bills. His only companion was an old transistor radio that sometimes caught faint classical music if the wires leaned just right. And yet, when evening came, when the house fell quiet and even the mocking voices faded, Walter sat in his shed, hands steady, eyes bright with the same fire he carried at 20. For within those jars and scraps, he believed, waited an answer worth hearing. The conflict began not with shouting, but with laughter. His grandchildren discovered the odd-looking clay canister one afternoon. Its lid fitted with tubes and a small gauge and burst into giggles. "Grandpa, is this your spaceship?" one of them teased, tapping the side until it rattled. His son, Daniel, shook his head with weary exasperation. "Dad, you cannot keep playing with this junk. You are 72. You should be resting, not crawling around with wires and pipes." Walter tried to explain, his voice quiet but certain. "It is not junk. It is a cooling unit. No electricity required. See, with sand and water. The temperature drops. It can keep medicine safe or food fresh, even in summer blackouts." But his words were cut short by another chuckle. His daughter-in-law, balancing a tray of glasses, rolled her eyes. "Who would ever use something like that? We have refrigerators, Dad. This is the 21st century, not the war years." The grandchildren laughed harder. One pretended to fan himself dramatically, saying, "Wow, Grandpa, the great inventor." Another muttered, "Too old to matter, too old to understand." The words landed sharper than they knew. For a moment, Walter's hands trembled as he wiped them on his apron, but he said nothing. He simply closed the lid of the canister and went back to his notes. The room's chatter moved on, but the sting of being dismissed lingered like a splinter in his chest. That night, while the family slept upstairs, Walter returned to the shed. The ridicule of his loved ones echoed in his ears, but instead of breaking him, it pressed him deeper into his work. He adjusted the seal, tested the gauge again, and whispered into the stillness, "Let them laugh. One day, they will see." Long before his hair turned silver and his knees stiffened with every climb up the stairs, Walter Quinn was a builder of ideas. In the factory of his youth, he could take apart a motor with bare hands and put it back together smoother than before. Supervisors trusted him with the hardest repairs. Engineers came to him when they were stuck. And more than once his suggestions saved entire production lines from collapse. But he was never promoted. He was the quiet worker in the corner, the man who handed over solutions while others took the credit. At home, the pattern was no different. His late wife, Clara, used to smile at his projects, slipping him spare coins for parts when money was tight. But his children, growing in a world of fast machines and quicker fortunes, learned to be embarrassed by his contraptions. They wanted him to be ordinary, a man who left inventions behind and focused on bills, schools, and appearances. When he tried to show them a water filter he had built in the 70s, they sighed and called it a hobby. When he repaired a neighbor's broken pump during a storm, they muttered that he wasted his strength for nothing. The years piled up, and with them the quiet injustices. His patents, sketched in notebooks, never registered because he could not afford the fees. His ideas, sometimes mentioned at town meetings, were brushed aside as impractical. Even after retirement, when he still had the spark to create, the community labeled him eccentric, outdated, an old man. With toys, they whispered. But the deepest wound was not the world's dismissal. It was his family's. To be ignored by strangers was tolerable, but to be mocked by the people who once climbed his knees, who once begged for stories of gears and circuits, cut deeper than rust into metal. Every laugh, every roll of the eyes became another layer of dust settling on the memory of what he had been. Now, in the dim light of his shed, surrounded by jars of salvaged parts, Walter's heart carried the weight of decades of being overlooked. And yet, the flame inside him had not gone out. It flickered stubbornly, a promise that one day, the world would see the worth of an old man's hands. The turning point came on a sweltering afternoon when the city's power grid collapsed. Fans slowed, refrigerators clicked silent, and within hours, the whole neighborhood was sweating through the blackout. In the Quinn household, tempers rose as quickly as the temperature. Milk spoiled, meat began to thaw, and Daniel cursed the utility company while his wife fanned herself with a newspaper. In the chaos, Walter shuffled into the kitchen, carrying his clay canister. He placed it on the table without a word. "Put the food in here," he said softly. His son scoffed. "Dad, not now. We do not have time for." But then he lifted the lid. Inside, the air was noticeably cooler. He pressed his palm to the inner chamber and paused, blinking. It was true. The eggs felt chilled, the butter firm. Curiosity overcame mockery. One by one, they tested it, and silence spread across the room. For the first time, no one laughed. The canister, filled with damp sand and a careful system of airflow, Walter had perfected, kept the contents several degrees cooler than the stifling air around them. News of the blackout spread beyond their street, and with it came word of a local science fair seeking emergency solutions for community resilience. A neighbor who had stopped by for water noticed Walter's contraption and raised his eyebrows. "Old man, you should show this. People could use it, especially where power is scarce." Daniel frowned. "Come on, Dad, a fair at your age." But Walter, for once, did not flinch. He looked straight at his son, eyes steady. "At my age," he replied, "I know better than ever what matters," and so, against their protests, he packed the clay canister, his notes, and his trembling hands into a worn satchel. The city fair would be held in a hall blazing with lit screens and youthful ambition. Few believed he belonged there, but this was the moment when years of dust and dismissal would meet the light. The exhibition hall was buzzing with energy. Bright banners hung from the rafters, drones whirred above the booths, and young inventors in crisp shirts pitched polished gadgets to judges holding tablets. In the middle of it all, Walter stood quietly by a wooden table, his clay canister looking almost laughable beside machines that blinked with lights and sang with code. When the judges approached, one of them raised a brow. "Sir, is this your entry?" Walter nodded and opened the lid. "A cooling system," he explained, voice steady though his hands shook. "No electricity required. It uses evaporation through sand and clay. Simple, cheap, anyone can build it. It can keep medicine safe or food fresh in places where power fails." The panel leaned closer, skeptical at first. But when the thermometer inside showed a clear drop in temperature, their eyes shifted. One judge whispered, "This could save lives in rural clinics." Another added, "And it costs..." "How much to make?" "Only a few dollars," Walter replied. The hall grew quieter as word spread. Soon a small crowd gathered, students, reporters, even rival inventors, all staring at the humble canister. Flashes from cameras lit Walter's lined face. He felt as if time itself had folded back, carrying him to the factory floor of his youth when people once trusted his hands. Finally, the announcement came. Third place went to a solar-powered purifier, second to a medical app. Then, the host's voice rang out, strong and clear, and first prize, for innovation with immediate global impact, goes to Mr. Walter Quinn for his sustainable cooling device. Applause thundered across the hall. For a heartbeat, Walter froze, came trembling under his grip. Then strangers young, vibrant, full of fire were shaking his hands, clapping his shoulders. Reporters shoved microphones toward him. "Sir, how did you think of this? What inspired you?" In the corner, his family stood speechless, their mockery burned away by the roar of the crowd. The grandchildren who once laughed at his junk now watched their grandfather crowned as the man of the moment, his invention shining brighter than the neon lights. And for the first time in decades, Walter felt the truth. He was not too old, and he had never stopped mattering. When Walter returned home, the prize certificate tucked carefully beneath his arm and the photograph of him on stage already circulating in the evening papers, the house felt different. His grandchildren, who once trailed behind him giggling, now ran to greet him with wide eyes. "Grandpa, can we see the invention again?" one asked, tugging gently at his sleeve. His son, Daniel, stood in the doorway, words caught in his throat. For years he had sighed at his father's tinkering, called it pointless, childish. Now, with the image of Walter holding the gleaming award still burning in his mind, his pride mixed with shame. "Dad," he finally managed, voice low, "I was wrong. All those years, I never believed. I thought you were wasting your time. But you weren't. You gave the world something real." Walter smiled faintly, setting the canister down on the table. His fingers traced its rough surface as if it were a living thing. "It was never about the prize," he said softly. "It was about proving that even the smallest idea, even from the oldest hands, can matter." The neighbors who once muttered about his eccentric habits began to visit, not with jokes, but with questions. Could they learn to build one? Could it help their families soon? Walter's shed filled not with silence but with eager voices, children and adults alike scribbling notes as he explained airflow and evaporation. His once dismissed knowledge now sought like treasure, and within the family something shifted. No longer did they call his workshop junk. It became a place of respect, a reminder that wisdom does not fade with age, only waits to be heard. Weeks later, the story of Walter Quinn traveled far beyond the small street where he lived. Newspapers called him the grandfather inventor, magazines published photos of him smiling beside his clay canister, and community groups wrote to ask if he could teach them how to build one. His phone, once silent except for telemarketers, now rang with invitations to conferences, schools, and hospitals. But Walter never let it go to his head. He still rose early, brewed his peppermint tea, and shuffled to the shed in his worn slippers. The jars of screws and wires remained on the shelves, but now Each time his grandchildren stepped inside, they looked at them not as junk, but as seeds of possibility. One evening, as the sun set orange across the lilacs, Daniel joined him in the shed. He watched his father adjust a small gauge the same way he had done for decades. For the first time, Daniel did not interrupt. He simply asked, "Teach me." Walter looked up, eyes soft with surprise, then pride. He nodded, guiding his son's hands to tighten the seal. In that moment, the years of silence and misunderstanding seemed to crumble, leaving only the bond of creation between father and child. For the family, the lesson was clear. The old man they once dismissed had reminded them that invention is not bound by age, and wisdom does not rust with time. For the world, Walter's simple device offered hope where electricity was scarce, proof that solutions could be both humble and powerful. And for Walter himself, the greatest prize was not the medal hanging on the wall, but the knowledge that he had finally been heard. His life's quiet persistence had become his voice, echoing far beyond the walls of his shed. If this story touched your heart, remember that age does not define worth, and dreams do not come with an expiration date. Walter Quinn proved that even in the quiet corners of life, brilliance can shine and change the world. What about you? Do you believe that wisdom from the past can still shape the future? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your voice. And if you want more stories like this, filled with twists of fate and powerful truths, make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Every subscription helps us bring more untold stories to light. Stay with us, because the next story might just remind you that miracles often come from the places we least expect.